Good morning from India. Today is June 22nd, 2020. And I felt to do a video today. It's been a little bit since I've done a video. I've been doing more than usual in the past couple of months due to the circumstances. And I hope that they have been helpful in some way. It's a little bit of a blurry line as to how much to be speaking out, given the circumstances, as I'm not an expert on racial relations, and I don't feel like I am a big spiritual teacher that can give you really profound information around what's happening. And so it always feels a little strange for me to post something, but I also believe that sometimes people hear things from certain people and they resonate in a different way, and I know that there's people that I resonate with, and so that is my offering, is to those that I resonate with, or they resonate with me. I offer these videos in hopes that they are helpful. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about today is around spiritual resilience, and how do we get through these times that seem to extend. Most of the world has been in quarantine in some state for about 3 months, if not a little bit longer. And then on top of that, in the US in particular, but in other countries, there's these huge uprisings that have happened. And so the psychic realm and the energetic field has been really intense. And I've had questions around, how do we stay spiritually resilient in this when we see the trauma and the nonsense, the needless nonsense, the violence, the harm, the social media craziness that's going on. How do we stay in that kind of state of consciousness of calm and trust and belief in a better world? I want to say to come, but I want it to be now. Belief that we are in a better world. And so, for me, the obvious piece is trust. For me, trust isn't trust in other people, and trust isn't in external circumstances. My trust is in the intangible cosmic intelligence, nature. You might call it God or universe or spirit. It's in the life force that continues no matter what. And just, as a simple analogy, we look at nature, right? And the cycles. There's summer, there's fall, there's winter, there's spring, there's summer, there's fall, there's winter, there's spring. It just continues over and over. And that, to me, is where my trust is, that life continues. And people say, well, how do you get that? And it's a lifelong practice, and I didn't always have it, but I do. I truly do now. And that doesn't mean that I don't have fears, and it doesn't mean that I don't have times of feeling down, times of being in an emotional state that is just that. It's an emotional state, but it's not a questioning of my trust. It's just an emotional state. And these past 3 weeks, I've had a lot of days of being in an emotional state that is, has dipped down. But the trust remains, and that's what always brings me back up. It's through my practices and through the self-discipline and the disciplining of the mind at first, and then in the past 4 years in particular, but probably, it's really started about 8 years ago, of understanding that it's not just all about the mind. There's a lot of work to be done there, but we really must understand how the body holds our beliefs and our programs and our conditioning. And in order to believe in the potential of the future, we have to acknowledge and recognize our past and how we hold that in our body. And I think so much work is being done now about getting into your body and moving that energy that holds these different patterns and energetic imprints. And it's a combination, I think, of working with both the body and the mind. And then for me, it just became, after years of work, I mean, I've been on this journey now for 20, 21 years. Now it's my state of being, this trust. And it pervades every aspect of my life. And that's probably a difference. Like, some people have trust in certain aspects of life, but then when other aspects of their life get hit with something, the trust goes away. And for me, it doesn't. It's in every aspect, whether it's personal, around my family, around my friends, around my work, around life, my country. The trust is there. There's no compartmentalizing of it. The second aspect where I think trust for me comes in is understanding that how to kind of sit with the paradox of personal involvement and then stepping back and kind of looking at things with a bigger perspective, that more kind of meta perspective. And for me, this has come into play a lot because due to the circumstances in the US and in Minnesota, which is my home state particularly, I really felt compelled to re-engage in a way that I haven't since I left the US. For 8 years, I have really stepped away with really no desire to be engaged in the energy field of the US. But what's happened recently, something shifted for me, and I really have felt like I need to be engaged with that energy. And so I've done so on different levels, tangibly and here on my own, in my own work and how I work, but also, in engaging with other people and, doing what I can to be involved in what's going on there. And that's required a real shift in my energetic being. And so there's this personal involvement, and I've felt the effects of it. Definitely I've felt the effects of it. It's been intense. I've had fear, I've had deep sadness, I've had anger, I've had a little confusion. I've had to kind of dip back into my mind to see where my own programming around things like racism is still ingrained in there. These are things that I haven't really had to think about or deal with for the last 8 years that I've been away. And so I've cried more in the last month than I've cried in probably 6 years. And it's a shifting of energy, it's a moving of energy. And so there's this kind of personal engagement of it. And yet, there's also this kind of stepping back, standing back in acceptance of the bigger picture. Not once have I said, oh, I can't believe this is happening. I wish it would stop. I really don't want this to be happening. Not once have I questioned this piece of it. I believe it needs to be happening. It's not a surprise that it's happening. And I don't want it to stop. I don't want there to be suffering and violence and harm. I don't want that. And I understand that it's moving us towards something else. And that is where trust comes in as well. And it's harder to sit with that paradox of the small me, the personally involved me, and this bigger picture of understanding that it's happening exactly as it needs to happen. And that's not a bypass at all. It's an understanding and a trust in my belief system that this is a cosmic intelligence at work. And we are involved in that. Humans are choosing to play it out in the way that it's playing out. But the bigger picture is this cosmic intelligence. And another way to look at it, I think, is to look at the incidents of George Floyd. And when you look at the murder of this man, it's horrible. It's unnecessary. It should not have happened, right? Like, there's no doubt about it. It's horrible. And so there's this personal, day-to-day, here on the earth, this should not happen. And then when you step back and you see the ripple effect that that death has caused in the country, around the world, like gratitude for that incidence. Because it is changing us. There is a shift that's happening. And so how do we sit with those two things? It doesn't have to be one or the other. If you're ignoring one and just looking at this, you're just looking at, well, it's the big change in the world that's happening, which I actually believe, but that doesn't really embody your humanness, the humanity, right? And if you're just looking at this, of, oh my God, that is so horrible and it should never ever happen again, then you're really missing out on this other view, which, if you're not prone to the thinking that there's something bigger out there, whatever you want to call it, then you will stay with this. But I believe the way to find peace is to find a balance between these two perspectives. It can be this, and it can be this. They don't discount either perspective. And for that, you have to have trust. And for that, you have to have resiliency, spiritual resiliency. It's not about being apathetic. It's not about saying that, oh, it's all for the good of the world. That's one piece of it. Then there's this embodiment of humanity that also needs to take place. And how are we taking care of our human, of our people? It's the compulsion to make change, so we don't need these triggers anymore to have these huge changes. So it's a paradox that we sit with. And one of the things I've learned the deeper I've gotten into my spiritual journey is that everything is a paradox. There's no black and white, right or wrong, in a big sense. In smaller senses, there are sometimes, but it gets pretty gray when you start to bring it out into a bigger sense. And how do we stay, how do we tolerate that discomfort of both of those perspectives? So I invite you to maybe do some contemplation, some journaling on that, and if you'd like to have a conversation with me, I'm of course open for that. So take good care of yourselves, take care of your family, of your community, and let's take care of this world. Namaste.